Hello, my name is Elle Klein, and today I'm going to teach you how to do some basic aluminum welding, TIG welding. I've been welding for about 5 years, so I'll show you some of the things that I do and tricks that I've learned along the way. First, I'll teach you how to run a pass with no filler metal, so that way you can get a feel for what the puddle should look like and how it should look, and then we'll add in some filler, which it'll be a different step for you, and then we'll combine everything we learned and stick these two pieces of metal together successfully, and so they won't break apart, and you'll have a sound weld. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll show you what you need to know. Just a couple safety tricks before we get started. It is going to get hot, so wear your gloves. They make thicker gloves, but you want something that's not so thick that you can't feel the metal, and you'll be able to control this. Usually use a block. You can use a block with pretty much anything that can take heat. So I have this brick here that I like to use. You can use a block of metal, something to rest your hand on, because this is gonna get super hot. My welding hood, you gotta protect your eyes, obviously. So I have my shade setting set to an 11, which I think is ideal so you don't hurt your eyes too much. I know some people go lower, some people go higher, but that's kind of been the sweet spot for me. With TIG welding, fortunately there's not a lot of sparks, but you also don't want to wear anything that's flammable because you might catch on fire. It does happen, and usually since you're underneath the hood, you won't know. You'll smell it first, and then it's always a fun time getting out. Stop, drop, and roll. Don't forget, you should wear long sleeves because you do get sunburnt. You can see I was welding for a very long time and at very high amperage, so I did get pretty sunburnt, and now I'm peeling. So that goes to show you it does happen, it is real, but I mean, do your weld at your own risk. Just know that's a possibility. So before we start welding, setup is very important, especially with aluminum, because you want everything to be super clean, and the cleaner that it is, the better weld you're gonna have. So your table, you can see I ground down a spot, so that will help you because whenever you put your ground to the table, it'll have a better ground to the metal. The metal is super clean. I also ground that down. Any contaminations that are on your metal, you're going to see in your weld. So just keep that in mind. You can cut some corners, but it will show. So this isn't perfectly clean. You can still see some dirt in there, but it might show up during the weld. We'll see, but that's key. Setup is key. And then whenever you weld aluminum, you want your polarity to be on AC, alternating current. I turned my settings to high, so we're at about 250 amps, I would say, according to this range. Every welder is going to be a little different, so you'll have to play around with your settings. And the gas you use is straight argon, and that's also key as well. So your components for TIG welding, you have your TIG torch. Inside your torch you have a piece of tungsten, and that's where the electric current shoots out of. And you have your cup that holds in your shielding gas so your weld doesn't oxidize. Ideally you would have a bigger cup for welding aluminum so that it'll surround the weld better. Then you have your collet that holds your tungsten in there. Your tungsten should always be clean. Whenever it gets dirty, just put it on the bench grinder, clean it up, and put it back in, and you will thank yourself later. I have a gas lens in this setup, and I like those a lot. They definitely make a difference for making a cleaner weld. And then you put that in, put your cup in, and then this is how you adjust your tungsten. The distance that your tungsten is sticking out does make a difference. Ideally you want it in as far in as possible, but you also want your tungsten to be as close as you can to the metal, so it's just going to stick out a little bit. Sometimes if you're welding in some tight corners or something, you might have to stick it out a little. You can turn up your gas, that'll help cover your weld. So ideally you want your tungsten sticking out as little as possible, and then when you're welding you want it as close to the metal as possible. And then you have your foot pedal. and that controls how much heat you're putting in. So obviously it's like a gas pedal. The farther you push down, the hotter it's gonna be. You'll start by pushing all the way down usually, waiting for your puddle to start. You'll see a little round puddle starting, and then once you do that, you start going. Just keep it straight, simple, right, come all the way down. You want your hand to be as comfortable as possible. So always have your hand resting on something when you're welding, and just keep it, do a couple dry passes, get used to the motion. Remember, you do not want to touch your tungsten to the metal, otherwise you'll see a big poof. The color of the weld will change. It'll be very obvious when you touch. And then once that happens, go to the bench grinder, clean it off, start over. Do this motion, get a couple practices in, get used to the feeling of the torch, keep the torch the same angle, and then we'll start with that. I'll just run a quick pass like this, and you'll see how it looks with no filler metal, and just get the basic feeling for it. Okay, so once you have a good feeling with that, you practice, your puddle is about the same size and you keep it consistent through the whole thing, then you can start adding in some filler. So this is where it gets a little more tricky. Whenever you're feeding in the metal, you'll get used to the feeling of how to feed it in there. Like whenever you first start, usually you'll like just dab it in like this, but then it's gonna get to the point where the metal comes all the way up to here and you have to stop welding. And if you can run the pass longer, the prettier it's gonna look, the nicer it's gonna be. So you'll learn to use your thumb to push it in like that at a consistent rate, and that's just something that'll come along the way. But for now, just, you don't have to worry about that too much, and just do like that, dab it in there. So what you'll do is you'll see your puddle start. Don't add it in yet. Once you start moving, just keep a consistent dab. You'll know when to do it. You just add a little drop in the very front of your puddle and you'll see it go in. The weld will cool, and just keep on going. You can go pretty slow when you're first learning, and you'll see it. You can like stop as you add in the drop of metal, and then keep going, wait for your puddle to heat up. The more you do it, you'll be able to get more familiar of what it should look like, but the more consistent you are, the prettier the weld will be. So you want to be adding at the same pace and just moving right along, and it should look like a little stack of dimes, and that's step 2. And now the third step, we'll learn how to actually weld pieces together, which is the reason you weld in the first place. But it's important to get comfortable with the first 2 things before just jumping into trying to stick 2 pieces together, because it is a little more tricky and harder to get used to. So what I did is I put a bevel in these 2 things, because we're just going to do a butt joint, which is just butting 2 pieces of metal together and running a straight line. So if it's just 2 sharp edges like this, your metal is not going to have anywhere to really go. It's not going to sink in as much and penetrate the metal as much. So what I did is I put a little bevel, a little angle on the side of the plate here, so that the metal will have something to sink into. And so that's important, that the metal is heated up enough where the weld actually pushes through the metal. So it'll look nicer, and all we're going to do is the same basic thing. You see your puddle, and you'll just move right around, and you'll see it flow into the little groove we've made here. And yeah, it should look pretty nice, like your bead that'll be here. And then we'll throw it on the ground or something, see how good it holds up. But it should look nice and be pretty strong. So here are the 3 passes all next to each other. Here's the first one with no filler metal at all, and we're just getting the feel for it. So our focus was on keeping the bead consistent, and as you can see, it's all about the same size. So That came from adjusting to the puddle. So if it looked like it was getting a little bigger, you either back off your heat or move a little faster. If it looks like it's getting too small, push on the pedal a little more or move a little slower, just keeping the puddle the same size. And once we got that movement down, we moved to adding filler. And that's just adding a drop every so often, about the same time as before, to keep everything consistent. You can tell where each ripple was. That's where we added a little drop of filler. And then once we got that down, moved to actually sticking two pieces of metal together. So you can see the metal flowed in nicely there. It's pretty flat. You can see where we added the filler, and any little jumps or something you can see through the weld because it doesn't look as consistent. So should stick together though, so we're good. Okay, so there you have it. That's the basic to welding aluminum, TIG welding. We went over the motion of it, how to start adding some filler, and actually welding stuff together. I think this plate is pretty strong. It's not going anywhere. So we did that successfully. Thanks again for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.